Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I'm a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pints with Aquinas. In this episode, we're going to talk about friendship. Specifically, we're going to talk about getting better at friendship, improving friendship. Why? Well, because friendship is super important, because I think it's one of the building blocks of our human flourishing or our Christian flourishing. When people ask me, Father Gregory, how do I grow in the faith? I usually start with prayer and sacraments. Those are obvious things. And I might continue with penance and study of the faith and service of the material poor and rich engagement with sacred scripture. Also, somewhat obvious things. But I'll often list friendship in amongst those different means, because friendship is one of the ways that God pours out his divine life and draws us by a kind of healing and growth more deeply into communion with him. So it's not just something extra, it's not something on the side, it's not like a pleasant way to pass your time rather than being bored whilst here on earth. No, it is the goods. Okay, so let's talk about friendship and how to cultivate or improve upon our practice thereof. Here we go. All right, so you'll often hear things said about friendship which sound awesome, and justly so, because it's awesome. So Aristotle, for instance, will say, without friends, who could live? Within the pagan tradition, as picked up by the fathers of the church, you'll often hear people say that it was, as it were, as if we were one soul in two bodies. So you'll hear, testimony to the intimacy of friendship. Obviously, maybe not obvious, but to me it's obvious because I've read it. But The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis is a really profound and beautiful meditation upon friendship. So if you're looking for a book with which to start, I would recommend that as a good one. But when we're thinking about friendship in terms of our practical experience, often it's a matter of trying to cultivate communion and get over some of our modern stumbling blocks. And I want to identify just one and then a way forward or a way through. So I think when a lot of people think about friendship or describe friendship, they think of our human relationships as observing either one or another pattern. So either they are selfish or they are altruistic. Okay, so either they are egotistical or they are altruistical. I'm just making up words so that way they sound like parallel structure. Regardless, egotistical I think actually exists. Altruistical I don't think it does. Regardless, okay, so either you kind of have yourself as the goal in a relationship and you live in that relationship to build yourself up, to make yourself feel better, to gain access to whatever goods you think might be at stake. Or you just invest yourself or kind of pour yourself out wholly and entirely into the other person. I want to submit to you that this is not a healthy way to approach human relationships, and that it actually conceals from us the true meaning of friendship and keeps us from the growth and the healing which might be dispensed otherwise. Okay, so here's why. So I think that the egotistical option, it's clear why that's not so good, because those people are a bore. So perhaps you've had the opportunity to talk with another human being, and that other human being really only cares about him or herself. And you'll find this when the person asks for advice, for instance. You realize that what you say doesn't really matter too terribly much. They're just using you as a kind of sounding board, because their voice bounces off your thoughts and they hear themselves more clearly for having engaged with you. So you're like, I think this is a really good idea and I would propose it strongly. And then the person's like, I am now more convinced of completely the opposite thing. And you're like, wow, perhaps it had been better had I never been born. Okay, so we've probably had experiences like this. Or the type of people upon whom you cannot depend, because they're always going to choose what is most subjectively satisfying in any given instance. So if it means canceling plans, they're going to cancel plans because they're always going to choose their own physical or emotional or psychological balance over commitment or investment. So we also know that. Now, there can be reasons for that type of fragility, which we want to be sensitive to, but also you realize that in that event, real friendship is impossible. Because if you're going to have real friendship, you need to genuinely be able to share with the other person and depend upon the other person. It's for this reason why authors will sometimes describe like secrets as the kind of currency of friendship, because when you share a secret with your friend, it's like the secret doesn't leave you. The secret remains within you because the other is another self. And so you have the confidence that that person will not betray the confidence. Wow, both apply. That the person will not betray your secret because they are like unto you and you are like unto them and you have a real union, okay? But if you can't rely upon somebody like that because they're too self-interested or they're utterly incapable of seeing things from your perspective or even seeing you, it's just not going to be friendship, which is a shame. But alas, here we are. Now, we're going to find ourselves in relationships that are unequal, and that's part of life too, but we need to be honest about it. So when Aristotle describes friendships, he describes them according to the good that is concerned in those relationships. So he says there's a kind of friendship of the useful, or a friendship of the pleasant, and then there's a friendship of what one might call the noble. And when we're talking about friendship here, we're thinking especially about that third kind, friendship in the noble, but we need to be able to recognize when somebody isn't really capable of it, at least at this point, or at least at this time, when they're really thinking about it in terms of their use or their pleasure, and you just become, what? An occasion for them to gain access to whatever useful or pleasant thing is at stake. Okay, so we recognize the selfishness and how that poses an obstacle. But I also want to submit to you, when we think of our friendship in like exclusively altruistic terms, that it also introduces problems into the relationship, because it's not really what's intended in human communion. It's more like a strange experiment in charitable works, okay? So what do I mean by this? Well, perhaps you've also been in conversation with somebody who will never talk about him or herself because they're always deflecting questions back to you. It's like, well, what do you think about that? Or, what interests you? Or where are you from? And you realize at the end of the conversation that you've spoken a lot about yourself and you don't really know anything about them. And it wasn't your intention. Maybe you're a bit prideful. Maybe you are inclined to speak about yourself. But that's not the point. The point is, it's like the conversation was cultivated or curated in such a way to ensure that this happened. It's like, why? Why did you do that to me? Or, you might have had the experience, whether at church or at a party or something else, where a person greets you and like welcomes you into a space, but you get the distinct impression that they are doing it because they're taking pity on you or they're showing you charity. It's like, you go to a party, for instance, and you're a little bit nervous because you're not sure if you're going to know anyone there. So you're hesitant, but eventually you go. It's nice to meet new people, or maybe it's not, whatever. But then you kind of make your way through the threshold, and you drop your coat and you're kind of sauntering on over towards whatever table has whatever refreshments, and then somebody sees you and says like, oh, hello, I've noticed you're new here. Perhaps I could introduce you to a few people. And you're like, yeah, I'd like that, but the way that you're doing it right now makes me feel uncomfortable. Because what do you really want? You want to be the delight of someone's life. You want to go to the party and have somebody turn, recognize you, have their eyes light up, hustle you into a conversation because they've been really looking forward to hearing your opinion about X, Y, or Z issue, yada, yada. But you want the person to find you delightful. You don't want to be the object of another person's charitable project. But that's what often happens when we focus exclusively on this altruistic vantage rather than thinking about friendship in terms of human communion. Okay? So when St. Thomas Aquinas talks about love, he identifies two movements which are proper to love. One he calls love of concupiscence, and the other he calls love of friendship. Now, when we hear that, we think concupiscence. Doesn't have to do with original sin, so that's probably bad. Love of friendship, that has to do with friendship, so probably good. Well, no, that's not how he intends it. He just says love of concupiscence concerns the good, and love of friendship concerns the person. So if we're talking about like me drinking a glass of water, I have love of concupiscence with respect to the water and love of friendship with respect to myself, because I will that good water for my consumption, and it ends in me. But that love can be broken open, obviously, to another human being. So let's say I'm on a hike with another individual. We pack our however many liters of water, but let's say that the other person's hydration bladder springs a leak, and then they are without sufficient water for whatever course we've planned. And it's a matter of getting back, with good enough health so that way we can bounce into the next event as it lies in store. Now, I'm going to give that person some of my water. And it's not because I'm like taking pity on him, or it's like, oh, dolorous you, would that I had less water and you less water so you could feel more acutely the burden of my chair. It's like, no, like we have a goal, and I'm going to give you some of this water, all right? So I have love of concupiscence with respect to the water because it's a good thing, but I'm going to refer it to you and to me because it's for us. It's for us to enjoy. And so then that water becomes the kind of currency of our friendship, of our communion. But notice that it's about the goal. It's about finishing the hike. I want to finish the hike. He wants to finish the hike. We want to finish it together because it's better to do it together rather than to do it alone while listening to a lonely audiobook in the midst of nowhere, right? But the point here is that the good is for drawing us into bonds of fellowship. So return to the example where you enter the party and somebody's eyes light up. They delight in you, okay? And whenever we're talking about communion or friendship, we're not talking about a kind of exchange of goods and I stand here on this pole and you stand there on that pole and we have to refer goods to each other in a constant game of Atari and I need to empty my side of all the goods so that they can be yours so that I can be, known or feel the satisfaction of having evacuated all claims, as it were, to pride or selfishness. Not the point. The point is that we proceed arm in arm, side by side, towards a common goal, and that we assist each other in that pursuit. Because that's what friendship's about. It's about communion in the good. So when our Lord describes it, I no longer call you slaves, I call you friends, for I have shared with you everything that I have from my Father. It's about sharing, about partaking. I think about the book A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken, and he describes how he and his wife sought to bind their lives together by 1,000 sharings. I mean, in friendship, it's not always going to have the same romantic or erotic connotation, but it's going to involve a real sharing, because that's the point of human communion. It's to draw our lives together so that we can have a more profound experience of the good, because friendship, in making of the other another self and of yourself another self to the other, it increases your capacity for enjoyment. It makes it such that you can partake more richly of the goods which lie in store because you're doing it in the context of communion, and we can think here in the sense of the church of a mystical body. And in that way, we attain to the real scope of what was intended by God. G.K. Chesterton has this cool meditation in his book, The Man Who Was Thursday, where he is describing the protagonist Gabriel Syme, who has managed, he's a police officer, he's managed to infiltrate the High Anarchical Council of Europe, or something like that, and he's about to duel with one of the other members of said High Anarchical Council. And he comes to discover right before they draw their weapons that this gentleman is also a police officer. And he describes the man's, Chesterton describes Gabriel Syme's, just delight, transportation. That's not the word that I want to use. His happiness, okay? Why? Well, he says because throughout the entirety of this ordeal, his root fear had been isolation. And Chesterton goes on to say, I concede to the mathematicians that 4 is twice 2, but 2 is not twice 1. 2 is 2,000 times 1. And there, of course, he's being paradoxical, as Chesterton always is, but the insight is keen, okay? So having a friend is not like making life just a skosh better. Having a friend is like going from life and its prospects being impossible to life and its prospects being not only possible, but wonderful, beautiful in the company of another who has kind of transfigured this experience for you. Okay, so when it comes then to improving our relationships or getting better at friendships, what we want to focus on is a communion in the good. So then, okay, Father Gregory, be practical about this. In our conversations, we don't think so much in terms of a kind of economy of exchange. All right, you've spoken about yourself for 7 minutes, so I'm going to speak about myself for 7 minutes, and I'm going to resent you if you speak too much, and I'm going to hate myself if I speak too much. No, the point of it is to find common interests, right? To have a common conversation that actually gives life to a common enterprise. Because the point is this sharing, which gives unto a communion, which draws you further up and further in to other, to other things that lie beyond. The point is to enjoy the good, to refer the good to the other, and to receive the good from the other. Because part of that good that you will is in fact yourself. It's not a matter of holding those goods off at arm's length so the other can all of them and I have none of them. No, you will yourself, and you will to receive the other in friendship so that your lives might be enriched and your enjoyment thereof, deepened. So when it comes to conversation, try to find those common subjects, those things that animate you both, those projects that you can do together or undertake together for reasons of genuine interest. And then when it comes to, like activities, I think that men are very much activity driven. So I would say don't just settle. Don't just settle for what's easy or for what's ready at hand, because we can always watch sports or we can always just chit chat or gossip about X, Y, or Z things, but we want to get, out of our heads and into our bodies and inhabit more of our humanity in the company of the other, because it gives us, again, a deeper hold on the good, which we gain access to through this communion. So I would say, be bold, plan big, and seek to undertake ambitious or magnanimous things together. Now, in relationships between women. I think it might be a little bit different insofar as more of that communion is bound up in conversation. But that's not to say that women aren't adventurous, because they are, and they can be, regardless. I just don't have, like direct access to those relationships. So like Jane Austen, I tend to lapse into silence insofar as I don't have the same kind of insight into it. So your conversations, you're looking for common themes in your actual endeavors, your activities. You're looking for common things which will draw out from you a spirit of generosity. Now, you might say at the outset, I don't want to invest the time or the energy in this thing because it doesn't seem like it would, comport with me. In those instances, I think it's good to have a discipline of a little bit of sacrifice, to say the other wants this, so I rejoice in the other, and that is enough to motivate me. Notice it's not just I'm going to put to death my selfishness and live for the altruism. No, it's like to find in the other a good that is in fact yours, because the other might in fact know better and poses to you an invitation to a life that lies beyond. That's one of the reasons for which we have each other, because there are plenty of things that we would never do except the courage were imparted to us by those who love us. So I think that, we can't be content to settle or just exercise the preferential option for the lazy. We have to permit our friendships to challenge us to get out there and to go for it a little bit. And then I think that if you find that your friendship might be under some stress or some strain because you don't live as constantly in the presence of the other, then you need to make sacrifices to be together, right? So I think that that's just 1/3 and final recommendation is find a way to spend time together, because Aristotle, for one, thinks that friendships can't really happen at a distance. Now, with modern means of telecommunication, it is more so possible than it was previously, but I think that you need to build that common life so as to have a common store of memories from which your common conversation can depart, so that you can continue to build it out and not simply live on the fumes of a tank that was filled some 10, 15 years ago. So those are some thoughts as to how you might improve upon your friendships or get better at friendship itself. I hope they are helpful. This is Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel and push the bell and get updates when other things come out. I contribute to a podcast called Godsplaining with 4 of the Dominican friars, and we've recorded a couple of episodes about friendship because it's a favorite theme of ours. So you might check those out. You just search Godsplaining, friendship, and you'll have 1 or 2 or 3 different options that'll populate. And then I wrote a book. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. I hope that it will be of service to you. If you haven't yet read it, do consider picking it up. It's available where books are sold, Amazon.com and OSV.com. Boom. Know of my prayers for you. Please pray for me, and I'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Pints with Aquinas.